Well, welcome everyone. I'm Gary Salmon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Black Talon Cybersecurity. We have some exciting things to show you today. There's been a big discussion over the last couple of months about how are we going to deal with, AI-driven attacks and, how are some of these products like Mythos going to completely change how we're addressing cyber risk, right? If you've been following what's kind of been going on there, you can kind of feed in applications and software into Mythos, and it's going to tell you how to exploit it potentially. So I know there's a lot of theory around that, and how available is it going to be, and who's it going to be available to, etc. But one of the things that we all know is whether the good guys release something, or the bad guys release something, someone's coming out with a model that will allow organizations to either proactively address these vulnerabilities in real time or allow the threat actors to do it themselves, which obviously we don't want to be on the receiving end of that. So we'll dig into EAGLEi to help you better understand how you can leverage EAGLEi to address your attack surface and basically have visibility into your vulnerabilities, and most importantly, patching on a daily basis. And then, as Steve said, we have some really cool technology that we are just about to release. So this will actually be kind of the first public unveiling of AURA. So you guys are in for a little bit of a treat. So let's go through CTEM, right? This is kind of a Gartner concept that came out about a year ago where, the traditional methodologies of vulnerability management just really aren't cutting it anymore. And even before we heard about Mythos and its capabilities, we were advocating heavily for organizations to kind of get away from the traditional vulnerability management and attack surface analysis. So one of the things that CTEM really talks about is kind of the scoping, the discovery, the prioritization, the validation, the mobilization, right? So what EAGLEi really helps your organization do, is understand your internal, external, and your human attack surface. So one of the things that Black Talon Security does is we're also a full incident response shop. So we are hired by leading law firms, by victims themselves that are impacted by these cyber events. And one of the things that we always see is the typical way that these attacks play out. We all know social engineering is a big problem. So that's the human element. How do we assess risk of our humans within our organization? Then we look at the external attack surface. We know that quite a few ransomware attacks initiate through vulnerability exploitation on the outer perimeter. And then when the threat actor gets into the inside of your environment, they are constantly exploiting vulnerabilities on the endpoints to get privilege escalation, to move laterally through your environment, to exfiltrate data, things like that. So we're going to show you how EAGLEi does a great job at identifying those primary risks. Then the other part is, well, how often do I really need to uncover these vulnerabilities? Well, if you think about how quickly the attacks are moving, right? Think about 6-ish months ago, where some of the biggest firewall manufacturers were just getting crushed with vulnerabilities. Like every single day, you read the open source intelligence, those, and you're like, oh my God, not this firewall now, not this VPN, right? Not this console being exposed and causing a vulnerability, right? So the challenge with the way things are moving so quickly is most organizations, their scanning is not keeping up to pay or in pace with these types of vulnerabilities. So not only do you have to do vulnerability scanning, but it needs to be done daily. In fact, on the inside of the network, we now have vulnerability scanning done from an authenticated perspective every 4 hours. And then it comes down to how do we prioritize all of this risk? That's a nightmare, right? If you're a decent sized organization or enterprise, there could be hundreds of thousands or literally millions of vulnerabilities within your environment. And how do I know what resources I need to allocate in order to address this risk? And part of CTEM is kind of that, constant evaluation, allowing your network defenders to focus their attention on areas that really need it, not theoretical things. And then there's validation, right? So one of the big things that a lot of the government agencies are now saying, as well as cyber companies, is you have to address the known exploitable vulnerabilities, right? We've seen numerous ransomware attacks where if an org had just identified and remediated these KEVs, they wouldn't have had a multi-million dollar event within their organization and a complete shutdown of their operations. So I think those are the key things that have to be identified, and then remediation. So interesting fact: we are automatically patching vulnerabilities for our clients every single day. So if you want to address the current risk, you need to be doing this daily. The idea of weekly patching, monthly, or God forbid you're still doing quarterly, it's just not working anymore, and it's absolutely not going to work with these AI based attacks using vulnerability exploitation. So I know most of our participants are in the healthcare space. We have a couple that are outside of healthcare, but I think everyone kind of understands the threat landscape. We understand heavily the healthcare space. We have about 2,000 clients that operate in the healthcare space, everything from small mom and pop, practices all the way up to, large enterprise healthcare institutions. And one of the things that we all know is that these systems go down, it can be will be an absolute, disaster for the organization. So I think that the whole concept of traditional risk mitigation has to be rethought, right? I think any organization that is, operating with the mindset, what worked a year ago is going to work today, especially when it comes to risk identification, attack surface mapping, and things like that. Unfortunately, I predict that it's going to be a train wreck, right? Because you just can't keep up with the threats, right? Our adversaries aren't, looking at vulnerabilities on a quarterly basis and building exploit kits on a quarterly basis or monthly basis or weekly. We all know that, AI can basically identify the vulnerability and build the exploit kit in a day or less. And I predict probably by the end of this year, it will be hours, right? So you have to operate in the exact same way from a defensive and offensive perspective. So we're talking really about migrating from this point of time security to this continuous threat exposure management, right? CTEM. So we talked a little bit about this, but I still speak with decent sized healthcare organizations that are doing this like annual security assessment and an annual vulnerability scan. What I always say, and it's a joke, but it's not a joke, whatever money you're spending on an annual, assessment from a vulnerability perspective, just take that money and burn it, right? Because it's basically useless after a couple of days. That's how quickly these threats are moving. Sure, a couple of years ago, that was fine. That kind of worked, not for all organizations, but for some. And then organizations moved to kind of this quarterly scanning. Once again, completely useless. I mean, we stopped doing quarterly vulnerability scans 4 or 5 years ago for clients. We moved everything up to monthly. For some of our orgs, we moved to weekly, and for a lot of our enterprise clients, they're now doing daily. So, I think this is really, really important. And you may say, you've already said this, but I think the challenge is I think organizations aren't understanding the risk associated with not moving to this continuous process and exposing their organization to unneeded risk. So when we talk about the various attack surface analysis that we can do, we're really looking at a couple key pieces with our platform. There's the internal attack surface. So we use an authenticated agent. Right? Steve had mentioned it. It's not a secret. We use Qualys. That is feeding the EAGLEi platform vulnerability data every day to our back end, to our security engineers. We're able to see that data every 4 hours. So if we need to move and patch something critically, a critical vulnerability that is being actively exploited in the wild, our engineers can look at data that is anywhere from 1 minute old to 4 hours old and push those patches as needed, right? That's an amazing way of minimizing risk. A big company comes out and says, hey, this is an extremely high risk. There's hundreds of businesses that have been impacted by this KEV, patch immediately. you can leverage our team to push those patches for you and validate that the patches are in fact functional. So external attack surface. So we're doing something really unique in the industry with attack surface management, specifically external. So one of the things that EAGLEi does is on a daily basis, the agent feeds EAGLEi its internet-facing IP address. So let's just say you have 20 facilities, right? And you have 5,000 employees, doesn't matter. And you have 20 IP addresses for those facilities, and you have 1,000 work from home people or doctors that go and take their laptops home. I mean, you could have potentially an attack surface that is in excess of 1,000 IPs, right? Because you have all those people working from home. And one of the things we've seen from a ransomware and data theft perspective is that sometimes threat actors will breach a device outside of your normal infrastructure, those 20 facilities. They hit Stacy in revenue cycle management, who's working from home, and they leverage her device to gain further access into the environment. So the agents will report back their internet-facing IP address to EAGLEi, and then on a daily basis, EAGLEi will automatically launch port scanning against those IP addresses and a traditional vulnerability scan. So conceptually, every day you are getting a new attack surface analysis. This is critically important, kind of going back to the statement that I made earlier, which is there are always new vulnerabilities being exploited and discovered and exploited on firewalls. So my argument is if you're not patching vulnerabilities on your external perimeter daily, or at least being advised of the vulnerabilities on your external perimeter, you're going to have a breach through your external perimeter, right? That's that unlocked door that everyone fears. So one of the things we always talk about is, we're going to have your full IP list. Now, some people will say, well, I have a block of IPs or I have failover IPs. No problem. We can actually load IP addresses into EAGLEi manually, so it scans those as well. So maybe you have a data center that has, a whole block of IPs and only one's actually active. So we can load that in. We do feed SentinelOne data into this as well. So we are looking at CrowdStrike. We actually have some testing being done right now with importing some CrowdStrike data. So more to come on that. And then there's human risk, right? That's a huge component of your attack surface. What are your humans doing? So you'll see some screenshots on, how we're addressing the human risk right now, mostly through training. And then we actually have some other interesting concepts that are going to be coming down the pipe here in Q3. So kind of address the scanning every 4 hours, but what are we really looking for? So missing patches is one of the biggest problems that I see. We talk to healthcare organizations that either have an external managed service provider, an internal IT team, or in many cases a hybrid. And what I often hear is, "Oh, we patch," and I'm like, "Okay, that's great." But you know how many times I've seen organizations say they patch, but the patches didn't stick, and that vulnerability was still exploitable, and then an event occurs, and they thought they had patched that vulnerability, and they didn't. So one of the things that EAGLEi can do is not only patch the systems, but also advise if the patch didn't take for whatever reason. Maybe a reboot was required, or for some reason it just didn't work. So that is a huge problem. And I also believe a lot of orgs are only patching things like Microsoft, right? There's 250 other types of applications that we can patch automatically to make sure that your network is as secure as possible. And then KEVs, right? We can push patches to address all of these KEVs, assuming there's a patch for it. I get that. But that helps reduce risk significantly, right? So let's talk a little bit about this port scanning, right? We have seen numerous ransomware events where for some reason a port was opened on the firewall. Maybe it was done on purpose to provide support to a third party. Maybe a technician needed to do something, and either one of two things occurred. One, the port wasn't closed. It was only supposed to be open for a short period of time. Or two, unfortunately, we still see security through obscurity, where they throw an unknown port, a very high port number, thinking the threat actors aren't going to find it. And, that's a thought from like 10 years ago. That doesn't really work anymore. And then, misconfigured firewalls. How many times we see firewall consoles expose the internet, and then you talk to the IT team, and they're like, oh, we didn't realize that that was exposed, or they'll justify it and be like, oh well, we're the only ones that have the username and password, so it's fine. They don't actually understand the risk, or even worse, maybe there's a vulnerability for that exposed console that bypasses authentication. So these are all the things that you really want to have visibility into from an external perspective. So as Steve mentioned, we are leveraging SentinelOne. We are looking into CrowdStrike integration because we do understand that a lot of orgs are using CrowdStrike. But we are a S1 shop, and we do provide 24/7, 365 monitoring for SentinelOne. We do threat hunting. We do all of that. 100% of our operations are based here in the United States. We do not outsource anything outside of the country. So let's take a look at cyber risk rating. So I actually have a screen capture for you that I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. But one of the biggest requests that we had from our enterprise clients was, well, this is great that you can show us all of this attack surface, this vulnerability data, my human risk, my threats, my ports, but I've got so much data from you, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of pieces of data from you. Can't you just quickly distill this down and show me what I need to direct my teams to do? So we created a concept called a cyber risk rating. Now, cyber risk scores, cyber risk ratings, look, they've been around for a little while. So I'm not saying this is anything in concept that's new. But what is new is this is an ongoing assessment. Literally every day, your cyber risk rating is being reevaluated and rescored based on multiple factors, right? So it's showing you how your organization compares to other organizations in the healthcare space from a cyber risk perspective. It will provide a score for all of your locations, facilities, departments, however you want to group them. So that way, your network defenders can instantly say to themselves by clicking on one button, which are my highest risk facilities, according to the cyber risk rating provided by EAGLEi, and then direct resources accordingly. Look, you don't want to be focusing on the low risk facilities. You really need to be going after the high risk ones, and the cyber risk rating really helps direct resources accordingly and cuts down a tremendous amount of labor. It also provides kind of like what I call C-suite data points, KPIs, but advisement. So a lot of executives have to present their cyber risk at C-suite meetings, and then often you need to report that information up to the board. And the dashboard actually allows you to grab a couple screen captures out of it, drop it into your slide decks, and within minutes you have a very powerful story that can be presented to your leadership team or your colleagues. So one of the things that FBI, CISA, I learned it was called CISA last year when I went to a presentation, not CISA. So a little bit of knowledge transfer there. So one of the things that they started really pushing in the last, I'll call it about 9 months now, is identifying known exploitable vulnerabilities and patching them right away. So one of the things I often challenge cybersecurity leaders on is this exact question. Can you tell me exactly how many KEVs you have in your environment and the potential impact? So one of the things that EAGLEi really shines on is the ability to flag, every device, meaning endpoint. So Windows, Mac, Unix machines, every device that has a known exploitable vulnerability, so that your teams can either address them themselves, or you can leverage black talent to fix those KEVs for you. So this is something that you have to have daily visibility into. Once again, like 30-day visibility into KEVs is really a recipe for failure at this point. So It's all about moving from, visibility to action. I think a lot of orgs have part of the solution, right? They have some visibility into their external attack surface, their internal attack surface, their human risk, their threats, things like that. But being able to pull all of this data together so that you can action quickly, that's where we are right now, right? We either have to say, you know what, this is what we're up against, especially with AI based threats, and we're going to need to fight AI conceptually with AI, or we're going to have to realize that we're going to have a cyber event. It's not doom and gloom, but it is just the reality of where we are from a cyber risk perspective. So I think this is kind of a good summary of everything we just discussed. And one of the things that I always say is, are we more secure today than we were yesterday? And I think EAGLEi gives you that type of visibility and allows you to track those data points and those KPIs. So yourself as a leader, or if you're a step down from the C-suite, or you're in charge of defending the network, this is all amazing data that would take you probably days or weeks to put together manually. And then by that point, the data is already obsolete. So I'll go through a couple of the screen captures here so you can kind of see what EAGLEi is providing to you from a cyber risk perspective. In the top left-hand corner, we are going to give you your critical vulnerabilities, right? Those are your highs and critical vulnerabilities within your environment. And showing you how many, this is all just fake data, guys, in case you're trying to pick it apart. How many critical vulnerabilities were resolved in the last 30 days. Okay, if it's 0, that could actually be a really good indicator that the person or people responsible for managing your vulnerabilities failed to do their job, right? And if you look at from a compliance and regulatory perspective, if you have a cyber event and you have a platform like this, you can stay on top of it and basically say, here's what we were tracking, and here's where we are now, right? So probably didn't say that very elegantly. So let me rephrase that. Tracking risk over time is really, really critical from a compliance perspective, right? If you have a cyber event and you can convey to the person doing the investigation that, hey, we track this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and here is my cyber risk over the last 12 months, and they're seeing a downward trend. That's a very, very strong story that you can provide to an auditor, all right? That's coming in, say, from HHS or OCR. So the center of the screen is going to show your cyber risk rating. It's taking all of that telemetry that we discussed, the human risk, the threats, the internal, external attack surface, things like that. And it's converting it into a cyber risk rating that will ebb and flow as your risk increases and decreases over time. The top right, this is your Sentinel-1 data, how many threats were detected in the last 30 days. Is there anything that's still under investigation? In the center of the screen is going to be some benchmarking. The nice thing about Black Talon being heavily healthcare focused, we can benchmark your cyber risk against thousands of other healthcare organizations, like I said, about 2,000. And then you have some really important gauges as a cyber leader for your organization. How many external devices have vulnerabilities? Like what percentage? How many total external vulnerabilities do I have? In this case, 77. So you may want to dig into that. How many exploitable, right? Known exploitable vulnerabilities do I have? Over 4,000. And I get it. It's, relative or proportional to the number of endpoints you have. But for you, I think that's, really a really critical data point that needs to be tracked. How many internet facing ports are open? What am I exposing services, things like that? That shouldn't be. And then cybersecurity awareness training. Out of 559 employees, only 179 have completed their cyber training. Huge risk, right? And that's going to drive your cyber risk rating score through the roof. And that's why this org is getting tagged with a high risk rating, because they've got a lot of problems within their organization. All right, so let's take a look at asset inventory. Steve kind of addressed this already related to medical devices and the importance of having visibility into it. EAGLEi can give you visibility into any endpoint. So it's going to do a couple things. It's going to identify all the assets that we're tracking. It's also going to track any rogue or endpoints that don't have our technology on it. So if you have, for argument's sake, in one of your buildings, you have 500 computers, and there are only 490 showing up in asset inventory, it's actually going to tell you which 10 machines don't have Qualys or SentinelOne installed, right? So unaccounted for endpoints. So really, really important. You never want to be in a situation where it's that one endpoint that didn't have the proper tool set on it that kicks off a cyber event. So, this is a really nice feature for visibility and also part of being HIPAA compliant. So let's take a look at KEVs. So a couple things to know here. We can always look at our organization globally, which is what you're looking at right now. But you can also, right under where it says Lawson Ltd, as I said, it's all just fake names here. I can actually click on all accounts, and it would give me a list of every single location or facility or department within my org, and I can drill down to a specific one if I want a little bit more detail about that location or facility or department. But in this case, I'm looking at my organization globally. I can take a look at known exploitable vulnerabilities. So you'll see over here, there is a red shield kind of towards the right-hand side of the screen to the left of where it says average age. And what I've done is I've applied a filter and said, show me all of my known exploitable vulnerabilities across my entire environment. And within a second, it's going to populate this list with every single known exploitable vulnerability, and it's going to tell you how many endpoints are actually affected. And it's also going to show you how that's impacting your cyber risk rating. So another really nice data point that shows you, where do I have risk? How much is it impacting my organization? And within our platform, if we're not patching for you automatically, you can always click on the little I to the left of the 22,872 in the center of the screen. If I click on that little I, it's going to actually describe what the vulnerability is, the potential impact to the organization, and then it'll have remediation guidance and steps. So that way your network defenders aren't having to Google search, hey, how do I fix the Microsoft Win Verify known exploitable vulnerability? So we're always providing that kind of guidance to your org. This is going to be open ports. It's really just I'm sorry, I misspoke. This is threats. This is SentinelOne. It's going to basically show you anything that we've detected. So full transparency for us, for you, for your network defenders. Open ports. This is also, a really nice piece of data for you. I think it's important for everyone to understand where they have exposed services, ports, whatever terminology you want to use. Some are going to be legit. Some are going to be, minimized, maybe through network segmentation, things like that. And others may be a huge problem that you just didn't have visibility into. Someone just made a mistake in the org, right? Like I've said, we've done numerous ransomware attacks where orgs contact us. They had a ransomware attack. We start deploying our technology. We're like, hey, did you realize you had this exposed? Or, were you aware RDP was enabled? And then, they say, well, no, we never turned on RDP. And then you find out a tech turned it on for some reason and, misconfigured it. So wouldn't it be nice to have that kind of data? Training. We do have our own training platform specific for either healthcare or business. And it is going to provide kind of that cybersecurity awareness training that everyone needs, wants, utilizes, hopefully, right? I'm sure everyone on this call is doing some type of cyber training for their employees and doctors and businesses. But this is really helpful in terms of feeding data into that cyber risk rating, so you have full visibility into how well people are doing from a training perspective. So the other thing we have is AI enablement with our EAGLEi platform. So this is just a little sample of a response from our risk data assistant. So it is a AI bot that is going to respond to you. So you can ask it questions, and obviously, as you probably everyone on this call, I'm sure, uses AI. Every day you log in, AI lets you do something new and exciting, and we're on that same path. We're just constantly adding functionality to our RDA. So the risk data assistant allows you to start asking a question. So instead of digging through data on a dashboard, you're like, hey, I got some free time today. Tell me my 5 highest risk locations from a cyber risk perspective. Boom, within 15-ish to 20 seconds, it's going to analyze all of your data, and it's going to give you commentary on your highest risk accounts. We call locations accounts. That's just how it's classified. So it's kicking back that data set. So very, very cool technology. So think of this as kind of your personal assistant. If you're a CISO or director of IT or in charge of cyber for your organization, imagine coming in and just having a conversation with the RDA. Hey, what new findings do I have to worry about today? Tell me about this. You know what? I don't really understand port 12345, right? Can you explain that to me? And it provides all of that feedback to you. So we're super excited about how the RDA is being leveraged by our customers to provide information. And eventually it's going to be kind of your, agentic tool that knows you, knows what you like, the questions you ask, where you have perceived risk from your perspective, its perspective, and it's going to just constantly feed you better and better data as you interact with it more and we teach it more. So, this is something that is we're very excited about. Okay, so let's get into Project Aura. So this kind of came out of some requests from clients who are reaching out to us, and we all are probably aware that using kind of the frontier models, the ChatGPTs and Geminis, if we're being honest with one another, like we know most healthcare organizations are using it, some are restricting it, and a lot have no idea what their doctors and employees and business folks are doing with it. And that's where it starts to become very challenging. Now, this is not a security tool, but what it does is it provides you with the quote unquote, single point of truth in a secure environment. So one of the things that some of our customers were asking us for is like, I just don't feel comfortable taking our SOPs and our manuals and our compliance and regulatory, and contracts with our doctors and insurance and all of that stuff, putting it somewhere and potentially losing control of it, right? That's the challenge that we're seeing in so many healthcare orgs. People are uploading stuff to these frontier platforms, and they don't realize how much information they're exposing to these platforms, right? So the Chat GPTs and Geminis and Claudes of the world. So we started on an initiative in late Q3 last year to build a platform that allows healthcare organizations, frankly, any type of organization, to address these problems that I just mentioned. So what I did is we created basically kind of like a GRC platform, but on top of it, we gave it the ability to allow end users to upload whatever they want to it. So in this case, we've uploaded numerous documents to it. One is the OSHA policies and procedures, HIPAA policies and procedures, a full incident response plan, 65 pages of cybersecurity related information. We also uploaded some information regarding not chain of custody, I misspoke, a phone chain. So if there is some type of event and you're interacting with Aura and you're like, hey, we had a OSHA event, who do I contact? Right? It provides all that information. Or we had a ransomware attack, who do I contact? Things like that. So that's all in there. The other beautiful thing about this, oh, and it also does HR. So the beautiful thing about this is it has the ability to chain documents together. So a lot of times you may need to pull pieces of information from an HR document, from an OSHA, or compliance. And, traditionally what would happen is you'd have to try and find those documents, read those documents, then go to other documents, pull that information in. And trying to get what you want out from documentation is often a huge challenge. So here's a very simple question that I asked, or I said, we had a surgical assistant cut with a scalpel that was used on a patient. What do I do? And it actually starts crunching all of the information that it obviously has in its model, and it starts spitting out a full response. One of the really cool things we do, and a lot of the frontier models are now doing this, is if I click on thought process here, it's actually going to tell you how it got to the answer and what documentation it used. So transparent AI is so critical right now. So I'm going to show you a little bit more about how we're doing transparent AI. But most of the frontier models, if it's pulling information from an external source, it's going to give you the link, things like that. But this is going to show you, hey, did I get all this information internally? Which documents did I use? Or did I need to go externally because I couldn't find, the corpus of information that I needed internal to my knowledge vault? So I'm going to show you that here in a little bit. So at the bottom here is some of the response, right? The very end of the response, it's showing you the sources that it used. But here's where it gets really interesting. So if you look towards the bottom, you'll see in orange occupational exposure and or intelligence. So one of the things we do is, in order to make sure the end user truly understands how the platform came up with this response, we provide the trust spectrum ledger. So if you remember just a second ago, that response at the bottom was kind of this yellowy, I don't say it's yellow, orange colored response. So whenever Aura returns a result, it's always going to tell you the trust spectrum, right? So if it was green, it is literally taking quote for quote, or word for word, I should say, not quote for quote, word for word, out of a document that you put in the knowledge vault. So if you ask it a specific HR question and it comes back with, hey, here's how you deal with an employee who is constantly late, okay, it's going to tell you in quotes and in green that, yes, this was a word for word response. The other really nice thing is you can actually click on the response, right? If you remember that little oval at the bottom of the screen, you can click on that response. It will actually open the document where it got that response from. So you can actually review it yourself. If you're like, maybe it got it wrong, maybe it didn't, I don't really remember this. There's no searching for files. There's nothing like that. It's going to bring you to that source of truth. And then just kind of moving down, yellow is a synthesized response. So it's taking information that you provided it and maybe providing a summary of that information. And it also is going to warn you, you know what, I think I may have hallucinated a little bit on this response. You probably need to check, the information that I'm giving. If it goes out and searches the web for a better response, maybe you asked it a question like, hey, how do I fix my HP LaserJet printer? And there's no document in the vault. Okay, it's going to probably go out to the web to find a response for you. And then it's going to flag that, hey, this came back from an external link. All right. So really, really cool stuff. We've shown this to a lot of people and they love the transparency that we're providing. We also have a lot of really interesting features in here. We give you the ability to generate SOPs from this. We have the ability for it to automatically create its own images, right? Infographics. And a lot of people are like, well, I can just go into ChatGPT or I can have Gemini do that. Sure, but once again, you are, risking disclosing, potentially confidential information. So having it all done here and having it always up to date is really, really critical. One of the things, and I'm going to show you this in a minute, is we have a redaction tool, right? So one of the challenges we see is people unfortunately load up information into these LLMs that contain EPHI, PHI, PII, confidential operational stuff, and they can obviously expose that inadvertently. So being able to generate these infographics. The next thing is the trust ledger. So, for some smaller organizations, being totally transparent, they don't seem to care about this. But for our larger and enterprise customers and large health systems, this is amazing. So, one of the things we do is any question that's asked, any document that's uploaded, any changes made, to any documentation is all cryptographically logged. So we're running SHA-256. So if an end user is like, nah, I did this because Aura told me to do this, we can go back, review that conversation, and because it's 256 encryption, we have no access to it, right? This is something that can hold up in court. We can go back and look at the exact response, or we can look at changes in documentation, be like, okay, but look what someone did. They actually changed the verbiage in your HR policy. That's why you got the response you got. So this is something that is so critical in the AI world right now, is that we're creating these logs of everything that everyone is doing, so there's no questions about it from a legal and compliance perspective. Here's another chat I did. We had a ransomware attack. What do I do? So it can go through all of our documentation, just like it did for the OSHA, and start taking information from multiple documents. You may have an incident response plan, you have HIPAA documentation, things like that. It's going to bring all of that documentation together and provide guidance for you based on your policies and procedures and your operational documentation. And I think this is really where it starts to shine, is it's providing information back to you based on you, right? Not some generic information that it's finding on the web. And I'm going to say it again because it's so critical. It chains these responses together. So it's going to look at your HIPAA documentation, your compliance, your cyber, your incident response plan, things like that, and start building a response for you. And you can ask it questions, right? I did a little demo the other day for a healthcare org. And I was like, hey, tell me something that happens to you guys frequently. Like, oh, we always have laptops stolen. The doctors lose them. They're stolen out of cars, things like that. So, in part of our incident response plan that we had uploaded for this fictitious healthcare org, it had a process for that. So it talked about, isolating the device and remotely wiping it and validating whether hard drive encryption was enabled. And, it always follows up with questions, which is kind of the cool thing right now in AI. Hey, would you like me to build an incident report for you? Would you like me to provide an executive level briefing to send to your CTO or CISO, things like that? It's got a lot of capabilities above and beyond just kicking out a response. This is another really nice thing. So if you go to upload a document into the vault, the process is really interesting. The second you select the document you want to upload, locally in your browser, it will rip through the entire document, and using the NIST standard, it will find anything that it believes to be something confidential. For instance, a date of birth, a social, even an email address, a person's name and address, maybe things like that aren't supposed to be exposed. So it's going to give you the ability to flag that document and the content within it. And it does have an auto redaction tool built right in. So if it finds a social security number or a claim number or something like that, it's going to flag it. And then if you accept the redaction, it will literally block out that data before it uploads it into Aura. So this is all being done locally on the machine, not once it hits the database. So this is just an example of it. This is an escalation path document that I just had AI to create, to be totally transparent with you. But when I went to upload it, it started flagging things like, do you want this cell phone number here? Well, yeah, it's a escalation path. I do want that cell phone. Do I want this email address? Yes. But it could be a document that you don't want to upload information to. So all these yellow bars indicate, the pieces of data that the local engine has detected as possible confidential information. And then the end user gets to decide whether they want to leave it or they want to redact it. All right, so that is Aura AI. All right, well, just want to say thank you for those that attended. Appreciate you, and have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much, Steve. It's always an honor
Okay.
chatting with you.
Thank you very much, everyone.